Welcome to the deep dive. You know, it really feels like we're living in an extraordinary moment in history right now. I mean, looking around in 2025, you can just see these huge, world historic, game-changing technologies starting to scale up. But at the same time, there are these, well, huge contortions happening globally and in America too. It can feel a bit much, can it? So I guess the big question we want to tackle today is, how do we even begin to make sense of all this?
Yeah, and that's where this idea of tipping points comes in really handy, I think. Think about the iPhone or Uber even. There's that phase where things are building slowly, maybe a bit clunky, and then bam, it hits a certain point, everyone suddenly gets it. Okay, this changes everything. And then you get this incredibly rapid, widespread adoption, it just takes off.
Right.
Peter Leiden, he's been tracking technology and its impact for decades, right back to the early days of Wired magazine. He even co-wrote The Long Boom back then, which was like a history of the future looking at 1980 to 2020. And Leiden argues we're actually in the middle of three huge world historic tipping points right now.
Three. Wow. Okay. So for this deep dive, our mission really is to unpack that idea, Leiden's concept of tipping points. Maybe first by looking back at American history, how we've handled moments like this before, and then really dig into these three profound changes he sees unfolding around us today. Okay, let's unpack this then. Leiden talks about new technologies not just adding on, but actively replacing the old ways, like your Uber example. It wasn't just another option. It fundamentally changed how people thought about getting around. And the old taxi system, well, it basically got dismantled as the new thing really took off. You see the old come down while the new builds up.
Exactly. And the really fascinating thing, this isn't new for America, not at all. We've actually been right here in this kind of situation 3 times before. Leiden points to these rough 80-year cycles, and each time they've kicked off these incredible bursts of innovation, usually lasting about, say, 25 years, just widespread, unbelievable change. Let's start with the first one, the earliest cycle. Think about the founding of America itself, roughly 1787 to 1815. This was really an extension of the European Enlightenment, wasn't it? A fundamental system change, moving from, feudal structures to what we think of as the modern world. And America, with this wide open continent, well, that just fueled innovation, pushed everything forward.
Drawing parallels through history like that is interesting. So the next cycle, this is where it gets really intense, right? Post-Civil War, say 1865 to 1890. I mean, the political conflict then was just extreme. Passions were incredibly high. You had 750,000 Americans killed. It highlights that massive tension. The North's early manufacturing, needing free labor, versus the Old South's reliance on slavery, and you saw how fiercely people rooted in that old system defended it.
Absolutely. But here's the part that maybe gets overlooked sometimes. Despite all that horrific conflict, after 1865, for the next 25 years or so, there was just this unbelievable explosion of progress. Think about it, the Homestead Act, giving away 150 acres to people moving west, for free. Land-grant universities popping up everywhere, building higher education for ordinary people, pushing scientific farming, and the tech boom, 175,000 miles of railroad track laid down, stitching the whole continent together. It was a complete reinvention of the country in just a quarter century.
Right. Total reinvention. Okay. And then the most recent parallel, the one maybe closer in memory, post-World War II, right? 1945 to 1970, the backdrop there was the Great Depression. The old economic system just, well, it wasn't working anymore. And American society was super polarized then, too. There was even an America First movement in the 30s. People were talking about being on the verge of serious, violent conflict. Then came FDR and the New Deal coalition.
Right. And what followed from 45 to 70 was what Leiden calls the Great Post-War Boom. Maybe the high point of global capitalism, really. And again, look at the dramatic changes squeezed into those 25 years, taxing the wealthiest at 90%. Unbelievable investment in public infrastructure, like the interstate highway system, building the suburbs, the GI Bill sending a whole generation, the boomers, to college. The Great Society programs, it's the same pattern, isn't it? The old system breaks down, huge conflict, and then building something dramatically different.
So if history really does kind of echo like this, Leiden's saying we're right in the middle of that pattern again, experiencing not one, but 3 of these massive world historic changes all at once. Let's talk about them. The first one feels, well, almost unavoidable now. Artificial intelligence. You could almost pinpoint the moment, couldn't you? ChatGPT 3.5 arriving in November 2022. Leiden calls that a world historic moment, like the starting gun for the age of AI.
Yeah, and when he uses the word age, like, the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, he means a really fundamental, game-changing technology, a step change in what we can do. Once you cross that threshold, you just don't go back. He compares the amplification of our mental powers through computers and now AI to how mechanical engines, starting with steam, amplified our physical powers. That's what created modern prosperity, that physical amplification. AI, he argues, is doing that for our minds. It's a whole new world opening up.
Amplifying our minds, that's a powerful way to put it. Like steam engines for the brain.
Yeah.
Okay, but AI isn't the only tipping point happening now. What's the second one Leighton identifies?
Clean energy.
Ah, right, clean energy. And the key difference here, as Leighton points out, is that it's the first energy source that's basically a technology. It's not a commodity you have to dig up like coal or drill for like oil.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is because it's a technology, you can consistently drive the cost down. There's this rule of thumb in manufacturing, sometimes called Wright's Law or the experience curve. Basically, every time you double the cumulative production of something like solar panels, the cost drops by a predictable amount, around 20% for solar. So it just keeps getting cheaper and cheaper as we make more. It's this incredible downward cost curve. And the same thing is happening with battery technology, lithium ion now, maybe solid state next. The costs are just plummeting, which means we're heading towards really abundant, cheap, clean energy. That forward motion is just starting.
That consistent cost reduction is huge. Okay, so we have AI amplifying minds, clean energy providing abundant power as a tech. What's the third one?
Bioengineering.
Bioengineering.
Right.
Leiden points to the CRISPR breakthrough about 15 years ago now, which was around the same time, actually, as some of the early generative AI work was happening. And CRISPR suddenly made it cheap and relatively easy to edit the genome of pretty much any living thing.
Yeah, it's a profound shift. And a really striking example he gives is growing meat in a vat. You take actual cells from a cow, put them in a bioreactor, feed them the nutrients they need, and they grow into actual meat, not like plant-based substitutes, but biologically meat. Tastes exactly the same, apparently. Think about the cost curve there, too. Remember the Human Genome Project. Finished in 2003, cost about $3 billion, took 15 years. Now, sequencing a genome is plunging towards $100, maybe less soon. When you can understand and engineer biology that cheaply and easily, you can design for outcomes in a way we just couldn't before.
Wow. AI, clean energy, bioengineering, each one is huge on its own. So what does it all mean when they happen together? Leighton seems to be thinking much bigger than just the tech itself. He talks about building a 21st century civilization.
That's exactly it. He sees these technologies as the enablers for profound systemic shifts, really fundamental changes, like moving from what he calls financial capitalism, which has worked incredibly well for maybe the top 10%, perhaps the top 1%, but arguably hasn't been working so well for the other 80% or 90%. Moving from that towards sustainable capitalism.
Sustainable capitalism.
Yeah.
What does that look like in his view?
It's about reevaluating value, prioritizing long-term ecological health, broad societal well-being, maybe just as much as short-term profit. He also talks about shifting from representative democracy, where we elect people to decide for us, towards something like digital democracy.
Digital democracy, so more direct participation using technology.
Potentially, yeah. Leveraging tech to make democracy more direct, more participatory, maybe more responsive, and even looking beyond nation states. He sees that model, which was a big step up from empires, perhaps needing an evolution, maybe towards some form of global governance to coordinate things for, eventually, 10 billion people on one planet.
Okay, those are monumental shifts. Sustainable capitalism, digital democracy, global governance. That's huge. That sounds like the kind of transformation that, your kids and grandkids are going to be wrestling with for decades. Does Leiden touch on how incredibly difficult and probably controversial those kinds of shifts would be? I mean, a pushback would be immense.
Oh, absolutely. He acknowledges that. These big transitions in history have always involved massive conflict and disruption because the old systems and the people invested in them naturally resist being dismantled. That's part of the pattern he describes. I think his focus is more on, look, the technological potential is becoming clearer and clearer. The tools are arriving. The really hard part, the work ahead, is the societal piece. How do we choose to use these tools? How do we navigate the transition? How do we debate these futures and build some kind of new consensus? It's not presented as inevitable, but as a challenge we have to actively shape.
Right. So wrapping this up then, it feels like the main takeaway is that we are, according to Leiden, genuinely at one of these major historical turning points, a pivot point, very much like those earlier periods of American reinvention we talked about, driven by these incredibly powerful new technologies for sure, but demanding much more than just tech adoption. It requires deep societal systemic rethinking.
Exactly. And that's really Leiden's core message, I think. We need to fully wrap our heads around that challenge, understand the sheer scale of the invention, the rebuilding that we're potentially embarking on, Because, he argues, the sooner we grasp that scale and engage with it constructively, the better chance we have of shaping a more positive, resilient future.
It definitely leaves you thinking.
And if we connect all this back to the bigger picture, maybe it leaves us with a really important question to ponder. In this era of incredibly rapid invention, where old systems are clearly being disrupted and dismantled, what kind of economic structures, what kind of political structures do we actually choose to build for this emerging 21st century civilization?